All right, I'm in the Gospel of John, chapter 8. I'm going to finish up chapter 8 today in this message. To review a little bit in order to get into the end of chapter 8, I'm going to start at verse 26. 26 is the place that I think we should start, where it says in John chapter 8, verse 26, I have many things to say and to judge concerning you. But he who sent me is true, and I speak to the world those things which I heard from him. All right? In effect, what he's telling the people, where he is he's in the temple, and he's talking with folks that are there in the temple. This is a conversation that he is having with them. I explained in the previous message that this conversation is not a useful conversation between Jesus and the people who he is speaking to directly. The real beneficiaries of this conversation are the bystanders, the people who are hearing the interaction between Jesus and these religious leaders. And what he says is that, I have a lot that I can say about you. And he doesn't get into the details concerning what he might have to say, at least not for a few verses. And that's what I'm going to get into in this message and I'm going to start around verse 37, but really I should be emphasizing between verses 41 to 59. And what this is this conversation that continues between Jesus and these other folks. And again, try to keep in mind that the objective is for Jesus to speak to the bystanders, the people who are listening. He is speaking to them indirectly. And so he proceeds and he talks about a few things that I mentioned previously, and then he returns to some of these things that he has to say about them. All right, that's effectively what happens. Now, as I was reviewing this chapter, I realized that there are a lot of references to a father, a lot of references. And I think it would be useful to just take a few moments before I really get into this to talk a little bit about the significance of them referring to a father. In this case, they're referring to God as their father. But there is some significance here that I've noticed that the people in general just don't really understand. All right, now they're describing themselves as children and that they have a father, in this case, God. But let's take a moment to talk about just what does that really represent? What does that really mean? All right, let me start with the idea of just a general child. We were all children at one point when we were born into this world. And when we started out as little children, we were faced with several problems that we needed to learn how to solve. All right? I mean, when you start out as a little baby, you get hungry. This is a problem, and you have to solve this problem. And so, in general, babies will just cry because of the discomfort that they feel, and then food will just arrive. From their point of view, the food just shows up. So they learn how to solve that problem. If I'm hungry, I just make a lot of noise and complain until food shows up. That's how they will solve that problem. Now, of course, you'll notice that when you're older and you get hungry, this is not necessarily going to be the best solution to you being hungry. Like I suspect later on today, I am going to feel hunger. And if I decide to try to solve this problem by just simply screaming and crying, there is no way that anyone is going to provide me with food because I do that. That's just not how this problem is going to be solved. And so, in one sense, a child will learn how to solve a problem, but it's not necessarily the best way to solve the problem, and it could just be a temporary solution. And over time, they're going to have to learn new problem-solving techniques. All right? Namely, You're going to have to go to work. You're going to have to actually contribute to other people's lives in a way that they find valuable, all right? That's how we solve these kinds of problems. Now, as a child will grow, they will discover that they cannot necessarily go anywhere that they want to go. All right, you'll find that as a child begins to move around, they start to crawl, they start to walk, you start thinking about setting up boundaries in their home. And we have all kinds of elaborate things that we set up. We have doors and gates and all kinds of apparatuses in order to contain our children and to make sure they don't just escape and run out into the street where it's dangerous and they might be hit by a car, stuff like that. You cannot always go wherever you want to go. And then later you discover you can't have everything you want to have. This is part of growing up. You find out that, there's something that looks nice, looks appealing, and you want to take that. But if it doesn't belong to you, well, then your parents might inform you in various ways that you just can't take whatever you want to take. All right? So these are problems that need to be solved, and every stage of life as a person is growing up has a new set of problems that they need to address, that they need to work through. After you realize you can't go wherever you want to go and you can't have whatever you want to have, then you have to learn that you can't hit people in order to get things that you want, to beat up some friend of yours in order to get one of the toys. Those are things that people are supposed to learn and they're supposed to discover. And then later, there's something called a shoe, and you have to put shoes on. And in putting your shoes on, a lot of shoes have laces that you need to learn how to tie. And so you need to learn how to tie your shoes. This is a problem to solve. So every stage of life has its own set of problems. And the hope is, the expectation is, that the parents will teach their children how to solve the problems of life. And this customarily, or at least historically speaking, falls on the responsibility of this falls on the father of the children to teach the children how to solve the problems of life. And the reason why the father would have the preeminent role was because the father was more involved, historically speaking, was more involved in the society from this point of view. All right, there is the point of view of the socialization and the social point of view, and those are problems and those are issues to work through. But if you want to eat, all right, and if you want to have things, if you want to be a productive member of society, in general, the father was looked at as the person who would go out into the world, find out what are the expectations of the civilization, of the society. What do they expect? What do they require for someone to join within one of the, if I may use the word tribes, every business can be described as its own tribe, for example. For there to be acceptance and for there to be participation with the groups in society, the father would find out what are the expectations, what are the requirements. They would come back within the household and they would train the children to be prepared to participate in society in a functional way. There are some fundamental expectations in all aspects of society. For example, you're expected to be honest. You're expected to have integrity. Things like that. There are some expectations. You are expected to learn a skill with a degree of proficiency and efficiency. You should be able to accomplish a task correctly, and you should be able to accomplish it within a specified period of time. Right? Those kinds of things were the responsibility of the father in order to help the children learn how to properly solve the problems of life. All right, but this doesn't always work out. It doesn't always work out this way for various reasons, and I could talk forever, it seems, probably, about all of the complications and interruptions and dysfunctions that exist in the world that inhibit children and keep them from learning how to be productive and functional adults. All right. Now, one of the obstacles, I'll talk about just one of the general obstacles as it relates to these passages. One of the obstacles that people face is that when a person has a sense of discomfort for whatever reason, they're hungry, they don't like where they live, they don't like their means of transportation, whatever the discomfort is, they perceive that they have some problems to solve. All right, now there are various ways that people will try to solve the problems of life, and I'm going to divide these ways up into good ways and bad ways. I'll just start with that, just as an open-ended description. Good ways and bad ways. I can also describe it as functional or dysfunctional, right? That may even be a better way to consider it. Functional, dysfunctional, good and bad. All right, now the functional ways, or the good ways of solving the problems of life, are ways that are constructive, that solve the problems and do not create new problems as part of the solution. Dysfunctional ways are ways of solving problems that then also create new problems as side effects to those particular problems. All right, that's just kind of a general perception, a general way of approaching it. It turns out that the dysfunctional ways of solving problems have to do with dishonesty. Dishonesty and deception, just telling lies. If you're faced with a problem, well, how do you solve it? You just find some lie. There are a lot of people, that's just their default. If they're confronted with something, they have a challenge, they have an obstacle, all right? They are confronted with the reality that they are going to have to do something different, then their default mechanism for how they will solve the problems that they are faced with is, all right, how do I lie? All right, how do I come up with a lie? How do I tell a lie? How do I be dishonest so that I don't have to solve the problem in the way that people are expecting me to, or in a way that would be functional? I want to solve this problem in an easier way that doesn't involve as much discomfort as I would likely have to endure. And so people use dishonesty, they use deception, they just plain lie in order to solve their problems, mainly because they're trying to reduce the amount of discomfort that they would likely have to endure in order to solve the problem in a functional way. It is dysfunctional because it's only a matter of time before this gets discovered, this gets acknowledged, and then you're not going to be able to solve the problems that you want to solve in that way. Relationships will end because people will not want to have anything to do with you anymore. And many people are okay with this because depending on the circumstance, they can just form a new relationship with somebody else. A simple way to explain this is, hey, it doesn't matter if I lie to you, if I'm dishonest with you, if I deceive you, if I steal from you. It doesn't matter because there's always another sucker out there. And so I'll just move on to the next sucker. And sometimes that works out for people. There are some people who are idolized, who are perceived as heroes, who live in this way. Right? You'll often find them in political environments, for example, that they tend, there are some politicians who tend to be quite dishonest, and they engage in a lot of theft. All right, and they tell a lot of lies in order to achieve their objectives. And some of them are quite successful. And so for these kinds of people who want to solve their problems through deception and dishonesty and lies, they consider these folks to be their heroes. Especially if their heroes will give them a cut, a percentage. Small, it's usually a very small percentage, but hey, if it's more than nothing, then they'll vote for them. They'll consider these people to be good and righteous and acceptable, and we have to make sure that they stay in power because we either will or we might in the future be able to get a cut off of their theft. And this is just how people are trying to solve the problems of life. Okay? And so these dysfunctional ways, they do produce new problems, but like I said, people will often find that there are ways for them to work through those things. So they just consider these mechanisms of dishonesty, they consider them to be temporary mechanisms. They are not thinking about eternal issues or long-term issues, just temporary issues. They live in the now, all right? The now is all that matters, and whatever it takes in order to reduce the discomfort, in whatever ways it takes in order to reduce discomfort, in order to increase comfort, in order to maximize pleasure, minimize pain, whatever it takes to do that, now is the way to do it. And when this fails, it will be a new now, and we'll find another way to be dishonest and deceptive. And we'll just keep going with that and keep going with that until there's just no alternative. As long as there is an alternative, people will continue down this path until they finally run out of alternatives. The problem is, of course, when people go in this direction, is that the day will come when the alternatives are up and it's time to live with integrity. It's time to live in reality. It's time to live in the truth. And they won't have the skills that they should have developed during the previous years of their life, that they should have matured, that they should have grown. They won't have the skills to be able to live in reality, to live in integrity, to participate in society in a constructive and productive way. From their point of view, to them, that's good. That's a solution because now somebody else will have to take care of them. But like I said, one day you might run out of the next suckers. The next sucker, you just may not be able to get to them or get to them in time. All right? And this is real. All right? I interact with people all the time, and this is normal. All right? This really is. This is a normal struggle of life. So when the people in the temple who Jesus is speaking with, when the people refer to God as their Father, what that represented was it represented the idea that they looked to God to help them solve the problems of life. That's what it meant. That they looked to, that God to them was the person who would help them solve the problems of life. First and foremost, they had the law that was given through Moses. This was what they used as their guide, as the means of solving the problems of life. All right, but it turned out that they didn't follow the law. All right, they only used it when it would be useful to them. Okay, but if it's not going to be as useful, or they may have an alternative, they can just deny reality, then that tended to be a little bit more appealing, and people would fall into that. All right, so those are the kinds of struggles that everyone deals with. And here we have a situation where Jesus is having a conversation with them, and he's saying, look, there is an alternative to what you have. What you have is dishonesty. It is dysfunctional. All right, now they were solving many of the problems that they had, that's true, but the consequences in this context, the consequences that Jesus is referring to have to do with eternal issues. All right, eternal issues. They may very well be living in the now of this physical life, but there is an eternal life, something long-term, very long-term, that they are ignoring, that they are refusing to acknowledge. And one of the reasons why this struggle existed for them was because they had a preference for dishonesty, for deception, for lies, and for not acknowledging the truth and reality. Jesus was confronting them with this content, all right? So with that kind of a background, I'll go ahead and proceed into verse 37. I'm going to start in verse 37. I think it's a good place to start. I know that you are Abraham's descendants, this is Jesus speaking to them, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. All right, his word has no place in them. They are seeking to kill him. All right, their perception is that killing Jesus is a solution for them. All right, they are, because they are confronted with a problem. Jesus is a problem. Jesus is speaking things that they don't want to acknowledge. Jesus is a person who they don't want to accept. Not because it's about the truth, but it's about the consequences that they might have to endure. They might have to endure some discomfort. All right, and that to them is unacceptable. So they will solve this problem by denying reality, and they will have more comfort now. That's now, but later, of course, they're going to suffer for that, and they will have much more discomfort later. That is solving a problem in a way that creates new problems, all right, especially when you think in terms of what will happen in the future, the long-term solutions. That's what they're going to be faced with, all right? My word has no place in you. Jesus' word, the truth, has no place in them because this will cause a disruption in the reality that they want to live in. Or let me say it differently. It will cause a disruption to their fantasy. These people live in their own fantasy. And Jesus is there confronting them with the fact that they live in fantasy. They are confronted with this. This makes them uncomfortable. This is a problem. So how do they solve the problem of Jesus making them feel uncomfortable? Oh, this is easy. We'll kill him. All right, that's a solution. We will kill this guy. We will destroy this guy. That's how we will solve the problem of our discomfort. All right, which of course is a violation of the law. A violation of the Mosaic law. It's obviously a violation of the living God. He says, no, you are not going to solve your problems of life. You're not going to solve your discomfort by murdering somebody, by destroying someone else's life. This is not acceptable. All right, and while it might work now, don't worry. Later on you'll see it's not going to solve the problems of life. And there will be new problems that you will have to solve later. But like I said again, people are more concerned about the now than later. And so, they say, well, I'll deal with later when it becomes now. And then I'll figure out how do I lie in order to deal with that later now. All right? The now that will show up later. In verse 38, I speak what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have seen with your father. He makes it clear, look, you have a father who is not the same father as I have. And in the way that I've described this, it's a way of saying you have someone who you follow, who you learn from, who you take your guidance from or who you emulate. Right? You have someone, and it's not the same person who I live by and who I emulate and where I get my guidance from. There are two different people. You have yours, I have mine. They are not the same. You know, I had one person who said to me, I swear to God, you know, and they follow up with this description of what they declare is supposedly true. And when they were done, I said, well, that was well practiced. You don't believe in God. And what I meant was that if you do, you have a different one. And without question, they absolutely do. All right? No question about that whatsoever. All right? And so people don't understand, or they don't want to understand, or they don't recognize the reality that there are two different fathers in the world, in a sense. The devil is one, and the living God is another. And the devil is quite active, and he's very much involved in people's lives. And he has a lot of helpers, a lot of demons who help him out, who spread and continue to share messages and just share things with people and tell things to people and encourage people in their spirits, in their souls. They say things to them, and they propagate these solutions to the problems of life. Steal, kill, lie. All right, that comes from the devil. So people can certainly come up with these things on their own, but there is an additional participant who also encourages these things. The living God is someone else, and he is someone who we can turn to. And if we surrender to him in accordance with the new covenant, he will come and dwell within us. The Holy Spirit of God will dwell within us. He will make us alive through his life, through his living presence. And he will speak to us. He will guide us. He will instruct us. He will illuminate things to us. He will give us discernment. He will help us to live in reality. And he will help us to understand the better ways of solving the problems of life. All right, but they don't want to acknowledge that they have a different father. In verse 39, they answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. All right, so they're not going to talk about them being the children of God quite yet. They'll get to that. Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me. All right, you seek to kill me. A man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. Abraham did not do this. You do the deeds of your father. So they start with, well, we have a father, Abraham. Yeah, well, what did you learn from him? What did you learn? All right, what do you do? How do you solve your problems? How do you do it? And do your solutions conform to how Abraham solved problems? Now I understand that there were some things that Abraham did that were not necessarily the best way to solve problems. Okay, so we can't be absolute because, in so much as understanding that Abraham was a man just like any of us anyway. But Jesus is just referring to the overall perspective and the overall understanding that clearly Abraham would not just commit murder in order to solve this discomfort that they are feeling because of Jesus proclaiming things that they don't want to hear. And they cannot confront, argue, and come to a solution with Jesus on the basis of truth. Because Jesus is telling the truth and they are not. They can't do it that way. So in order to solve this discomfort, they have to do it outside of reality, outside of the truth. They have to figure out, how do I lie? Or who do I kill? How do I lie, or who do I murder is the more appropriate word. Then they said to him, We were not born of fornication. We have one Father, God. All right, so they start with Abraham, and Jesus says, no, Abraham is not your father because you're clearly not doing the works of Abraham. You're clearly not solving the problems of life like Abraham would. Okay, so they skip that, which is normal. That lie didn't work. So let's come up with another one. All right, we have one Father, and that's God. And you just said Abraham was your father. That didn't work. We'll go to the next one. God is our Father. Yeah? Are you sure? We'll try that one. Verse 42, Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Nor have I come of myself, but he sent me. All right, how can you say that he's your Father when, he sent me? And obviously you can tell by the works that I've done, they are the works of God. So, obviously he has sent me, and you don't love me. Right? Even the law itself states, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You're not even complying with that. All right, Jesus qualifies as being their neighbor, and they are not loving him. They want to murder him because he makes them feel uncomfortable, because they don't want to acknowledge reality. And Jesus lives in reality, and he tells the truth, and people are believing him. Oh, that's unacceptable. We can't let people believe somebody else. Everyone's supposed to believe us. Whatever we say, that's how we create our false reality. That's how we solve our problems of life. We deceive people and recruit them so that they all follow us. Right? This is really bizarre, I know, but that's the way life is often. So Jesus says, no, this can't be the case, because if this was the case, then you would love me, and you could say in accordance with the law, and he's the one who sent me, and the works show that. So no, I don't think that God is your Father. You're still not solving the problems of life in the way that we would expect. All right, in verse that was in verse 43. Let me go back to verse 43. No, I'm sorry, verse 42. If God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God, nor have I come of myself, but he sent me. Verse 43 says, why do you not understand my speech? Because you are not able to listen to my word. Why would they not be able to listen to his word and understand his speech? What, did God just sort of declare, oh, now you people over there, no, I decide in my absolute sovereignty and with my total control over every molecule of the universe, I have decided that you will not understand me when I speak. No, you won't. No, if I say something, you will not be allowed to understand what I have to say. That will not be, because I am God, and I say that you cannot understand. You will not even listen to my word. No, I am God, and I can't have everyone understanding me. And there are people who genuinely believe this. I don't at all, if you haven't noticed. I don't believe that. I think that is absolute absurdity. But I understand that probably the majority of Christianity in this day and age, most people really believe that you can only understand God. You can only listen to God if he decides that you are one of his special chosen people. All right? And if you are not, then you're just out of luck. It's just the way it goes. All right? I just cannot imagine God deciding, I'm going to create some people and I'm going to make sure that they never understand me. That makes no sense. Absolutely none. People are so concerned. They're so worried, all right, that God would actually give people the ability to choose to believe in him or not. They're so concerned about that. They're so worried that people will, decide to go into heaven when God may not necessarily want them there. That's what they're thinking. All right, they're thinking about that and some other things that they have to believe this kind of nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. The reason why they don't understand And the reason why they don't listen, all right, is simple. Because the consequences of understanding and the consequences of listening are just too uncomfortable for them. It's just too uncomfortable. It doesn't fit well into the fantasy that they want to live in. And you might think, how could people do that? How could people just absolutely deny reality? I mean, people would rather die in many cases than deny, than live in reality. And folks, I know people like this. All right, if you don't know people like this, it's probably because you're just a little bit too socially distanced, maybe, or something like that. All right, I know people like this. I absolutely do. They just simply, when they're confronted with something that they may perhaps understand or listen to that would disrupt the fantasy that they want to live in, this is just unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. And they will put it out of their mind. They will refuse. They will, they just are determined. They will speak back. They will react with all these false, dishonest, and distorted views and expressions, repeating back to me things that are the exact opposite of what I said, as if, oh, I understand what you're saying. You're saying this, which is the exact opposite of what I just said. I mean, people are strange. There are people who are just really determined, and it really has a lot to do with the fact that they just don't want to feel uncomfortable. And so this is how they solve these problems. All right? And if they can do this until they are physically dead, to them, this is an acceptable solution. I've even asked some people, well, what happens if you don't die before reality sets in? And I actually had one person tell me directly, I will kill myself. I mean, that's all right, what can you do? There's nothing you can do with that. All right, that's a person who, there's just nothing you can do with that. All right, you just move on. You go find a new person to communicate with. Let me go back to verse 44. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. All right? Now, whether a person acknowledges the existence of the devil or not doesn't matter. The devil is their father. All right? The devil is their father in that sense. Everyone is born into this world spiritually dead, and everyone is under the authority, in a sense, of the devil, the ruler of this world. And everyone is in a condition where they are susceptible to the ways of the devil. And there are some people who he will be directly involved with. And there's a lot of people he doesn't have to be directly involved with at all. They are already exceptionally dishonest and want to murder people in order to reduce their discomfort. He doesn't have to talk to them. He doesn't have to inspire them. He could just go talk to somebody else and work with somebody else, because these people are already fully committed to his way of solving the problems of life. Who is your father? Your father is the devil, because you solve the problems of life in the same way that he does. You participate in this world in the same way that he does. You work together with him. You absolutely do. That's who you work together with. You work together with your father. You work with him. And whether you acknowledge his existence or not doesn't matter, because that is the truth of what happens. All right? That is the truth of what happens. So when people continue to live in their fantasy, it goes beyond what people will normally recognize. So from God's point of view, this is what he sees. This is what he sees. He sees a division in the world between those who do the works of their father, who do the works that are similar to those of the devil. And from his point of view, well, they are children of the devil. They belong to the devil by choice. They have made the decision. He has offered a way out. He has offered a way for people to be set free from this bondage and to be set free from the long-term conclusion to these problem-solving techniques. It's not going to look good. All right, it's not. But people are so concerned about the now that they never think about eternity. And eternity is coming. It is. It's coming. All right? Being in this world and being in this life is similar to being in a waiting room. All right? Where you're waiting, for example, at a doctor's office. You are in the waiting room, and you're not going to stay there forever. The day is coming when you are going to exit that waiting room. Where are you going to go? Are you going to go? There's a lot more that could be said about that, but I'm just trying to say that as an example of this world, of this life. It is temporary, right? It is, and it is a waiting room. It is not your permanent location. There is another. And in order to be a part of the kingdom of heaven in eternity, in order to be a part of that, you must become a child of God. To become a child of God means that you make a change, you make a switch. You are presently, when you're not saved, a child of the devil. And the living God has given you an invitation to say, hey, listen, you want to be a child of mine? Here's the way it's done. God has defined the criteria. He has defined the way. He has defined the covenant. You either accept it or you reject it. It's all up to you. And this is the invitation that God continues to give out to everyone who is born into this world, one generation after the next. Every generation of people, every person who's ever been born and every person who will be born in the future will be given this invitation to become a child of God. And to become a child of God means you're going to have to be born again. All right, you're going to have to be born again. All right, let me go back to I'll start again in verse 44. You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. Okay, the desires of your father. Now, it can either be because you were inspired by the devil, or your desires just so happen to be compatible. All right? He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. And this is one of the characteristics of being a child of the devil, is that you work from your own resources. You do not have the resources of God. You do not have an inheritance in Christ. You have your own. All right? And these are not the ways of God. God has given us an invitation to be born again as a child of His. And when you are born again, you receive an inheritance that you are able to make use of while you are alive here. They become your resources. You will have new resources to work with. When you don't have those resources, all you've got left is whatever you can generate on your own. And some people can generate their own goodness. You don't have to believe that there is a God in order to have integrity, in order to be honest. There are ways of living in accordance with that which is good, and you can go along just fine throughout this world, throughout this life, and you can solve the problems of life using the knowledge of good. But it's not going to resolve the eternal issues, and you'll find that out later. There is more than just the temporary life that we have. All right, but like I was expressing earlier, most people are using that which is evil instead of that which is good. Verse 45, but because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? And if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? He who is of God hears God's words. Therefore, you do not hear because you are not of God. All right, I'm going to proceed into verse 48. Then the Jews answered and said to him, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? What good is that, right? I mean, this shows that they are feeling uncomfortable with being confronted with reality. And so this is their solution. You're a Samaritan. That's another way of saying, well, what lie do we come up with so that we can solve this problem of discomfort? We'll just say that he's a Samaritan. Of course he's not a Samaritan. They're right there in the temple. They can look up the temple records. They can see he's not a Samaritan. Right? You have a demon. You're demonically possessed. There's nothing you can do with people like this. All right? You just have to exit the relationship. All right? When people just start speaking things that are exceptionally and obviously outside of reality, there's nothing you can do. But Jesus answered in verse 49, I do not have a demon. He's the guy who was casting out demons, right? But I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Most assuredly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death. And he's referring to the spiritual death, and he's referring to the eternal death, those kinds of things. Verse 52, then the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets, and you say, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets are dead? Who do you make yourself out to be? And in verse 54, Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me. So if you want to know who he is, he says, look, it's his Father who honors him, who defines who he is, who recognizes who he is, of whom you say that he is your God. Yet you have not known him, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham, this is interesting, he acknowledges that Abraham is their father, even though in verse 39, he says, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. All right, when they tried to assert that they tried to assert that they were the children of Abraham. In verse 56, Jesus acknowledges that they are of Abraham. But this is from a physical point of view, not from a spiritual point of view. Okay, verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? There's only one way that he could have seen Abraham, and that is if he is God. All right, because if he is God, then he could have seen Abraham. And he is. Jesus is God manifested in the flesh. God manifested in the flesh to be a man so that he could come and interact with these people, confront them with the truth, speak to them, reach out to them, say, this is the truth, this is reality. Let me show you, let me give you demonstrations of things in order to show that there is reality, there is truth, there is a God. You are not living in reality. You're not accepting this. God did this personally. And he came as a man so that they would still have the ability to choose. If he came as God in all of his glory, came and did the God thing with lightning and fire and smoke and all that usually goes along with that from our general perceptions, if he did that, then they wouldn't have too much of a choice. Okay, but he wants people to choose. He wants people to decide. He wants people who are in his life because they want to be in his life. He wants people to believe him because they want to believe the truth and he is the Father of all that is true. He wants people who would rather live in reality and endure whatever consequences there may be, endure whatever discomfort. And it turns out that, that's the challenge, is that you usually have to endure a lot of discomfort in order to obtain the comfort or the benefits that outweigh the discomfort later on. Most people want the comfort right now, and they'll deal with the discomfort later. Well, it doesn't work out that way. It doesn't work out well. But in this case, this is one of the ways that God defines or divides who is going to be with him in eternity and who isn't. So he came in this way in order to give people the freedom to choose, but so that he could also personally confront them with these realities. And these people will die. They did die. They died physically. And they went to heaven. And they saw him. And when they saw him, what do you think that they were thinking? Probably something like, all right, how do I lie now? How do I be dishonest now? And it didn't work out well for them. All right, it just didn't. Okay, continuing into verse 56. Verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Verse 57, then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? And this is it, verse 58, Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Now, when he used those words, I am, right, he was making a direct reference to when Moses asked God for his name. Moses asked God, what is your name, so that I can go and tell the children of Israel that this is the name of the God who has sent me and who is going to set you free from slavery in Egypt. And in the English translations that we have, it's translated as I am. All right, I am who I am. So just tell them the I am sent me. He didn't give them an official name. Now in Hebrew, this word is a little bit different. It says, I will be who I will be. That's really what the proper translation would be. It's not, I don't think it's that important, but I just thought I would mention it because we were here. I will be who I will be. But here, what's of significance is that he uses the phrase that God used to describe himself. And with their understanding, he was communicating to them directly to say that he is the living God. That's who he is. Jesus is God. Then, verse 59, they took up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. All right, so he had something to say. He said it, and then he left when they decided to pick up stones to try and murder him, all right, because of what he asserted. And then what does he do? Then what did he do then? He left the temple, and he went, and he healed a man who was born blind. And he sent the man who was born blind, not sent him directly, but indirectly he ended up going up to the temple to then go speak to these people. All right, that's what happens next. So in the next message, I'll be able to go into the Gospel of John, chapter 9, the healing of the man who was born blind. All right, for those of you who are using this for small groups, I've got a question that you could perhaps use. What were some of your struggles to become an adult? All right, what were some of your struggles that you had to become an adult? Or what were some of the struggles that you worked with in order to become the kind of Christian that you are today? It's just an open question, something to start conversation with. I thought this would be a good one as it relates to the conversation that Jesus is having with them, the conversation or the debate concerning who really is their father. All right? Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for the opportunity that you have given us to review the conversation that you had with these people. And thank you for the discernment and the understanding that you can share with us through what you had to say. And I pray for greater wisdom and understanding as we proceed. In Jesus' name, amen.